Well, hi everybody. It's meteorologist Joe Chaffee. I am back, the 16th of May, 2019, and good to be back. I was away for a week. I only was able to manage to squeeze in one live stream in that whole stretch. Timing was just difficult. I was down in North Georgia in Atlanta, and I drove down I-81, which Johnny Quest, who's one of our regulars here, knows us all too well. I did it at night, and then during the day on my drive back on Thursday of last week. What a beautiful, beautiful drive it is down the mountains all the way into western North Carolina. The views were just spectacular. There was some sun, ran through a couple of rain showers. And Atlanta, by the way, really impressed me. A beautiful city. The road system was just amazing. Not a single pothole anywhere, which was quite a shock. Because as soon as I drove into New Jersey, it was coming back. It was pothole city. But the weather was great. I know you guys went through a rather horrific period, at least in my neck of the woods, eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England, with temperatures in the 40s. And a cold, soaking rain for a few days, but that is all history now. We've got a rather interesting pattern that is set up across the U.S. It sort of resembles what we had at the end of during the latter part of March and through the first part of April. Deep trough in the west and ridging in the east. You got a little bit of NAO going on, negative NAO. That's impacting the weather, but I have to tell you, with that trough now in the west, however long that lasts, we talked about last week on the one live stream, and even before I left, how the models were showing this screaming Pacific jet, and that has really taken hold, and we're getting weather systems coming in, producing big rains and big snows in California and in other parts of the west. So we're going to talk all about that. There's a multiple-day severe weather threat for the plains, from the southern plains all the way up, and looks like tomorrow is going to be a very, very active day out in the plain states. So we're going to take a look at all of that. I'm going to start. We'll start with what's going on now. So just give me one moment here. And here we go. By the way, let me just mention at the top, before we even start start this, I am still having difficulties. I am not able to broadcast live on my Facebook weather page. So we've actually moved the Joe and Joe Weather Show over to his Facebook weather page, which is Joe Rayo Weather. Okay, so if you're interested, you can watch it there. I will share it back to mine if you're not on his page, but go ahead and go on his page and like it if you're on Facebook, so that you can catch the Joe and Joe Weather Show. And if you're not on Facebook, it's a little more difficult for me to upload it to YouTube. So I don't know what the problem is. So we're just going to have to wait to see if Facebook ever gets around to fixing my issue. But here we go. We've got our surface map tonight. This was from 5 p.m., the 21Z map, and we have this very, very weak stationary boundary that's sitting across southern New England over New York City. It really isn't doing very much. It's producing hardly any weather at all. There were a couple of spot showers in southeastern New England later this afternoon, but it does swing up to a low up in northern Michigan and another cold front, and this is going to be our weather system for tomorrow. That's going to be pushing on through here with maybe a couple of showers or a heavier downpour very late tomorrow afternoon into tomorrow evening. I think the overnight is fine, and the daytime, most of the daytime tomorrow should be okay too. And I'm also thinking that much of the weekend is going to be okay. We've had, with all the weather that we've seen here in the east, and particularly in the northeast, we really are entitled to getting a nice weekend, and that's what I'm hoping for. Meanwhile, across the south today, a fairly nice day. In most places, temperatures getting up into the 80s, dew points in the reasonably comfortable 50s. And then, of course, you start to go up further west, and you begin to see the injection of moisture ahead of the frontal boundary that is sitting from the low in Michigan back through Iowa and into Nebraska, and then it swings out and becomes a warm front after that. There's a dry, cool high coming down into the Dakotas, where temperatures still manage to get up into the 60s and low 70s. That's the thing this time of year. Behind the cold fronts, the sun is so strong that oftentimes you wind up with temperatures that are as warm or even warmer than they are ahead of it. And the big changes are going to be in the dew points. You're going to see dew points that are going to be in the 60s ahead of it, and then you wind up with dew points in the 40s behind it. So it's a matter of it's less of a matter of temperature change and more a matter of dew point change when we get this deep in the spring and start to head toward the summer. And meanwhile, of course, out in the west with all the action that is going on here, you are looking at storminess continuing out in the western states with low pressure up in Idaho, but that's actually a pretty stretched out low that goes down all the way down into southern Utah, and you're getting this Pacific flow that's coming in that continues to create loads of moisture. Here's a really impressive looking satellite with this strong upper low that is sitting off of the coast of Northern California and Oregon, just spinning away. And of course, you've got this stream of moisture up from the Pacific and running into Southern California and lifting up and around all those clouds that you see further inland, sweeping around that upper low. And then to the west of that, there's another very strong upper low, and over on the far left, there's still another. So you got this long, endless jet with these storms coming in with the trough in the west. And I have to tell you, when you look at the upper air, and I'll show that to you later, the upper air, this trough is as deep as any of the troughs that we saw toward the end of the winter and the very beginning of spring, when we had the deep trough out in the western part of the United States, and even through much of the winter when we've seen it. This is, for this time of year, this is a pretty intense and cold pattern that is setting up in the western part of the United States. And as far as the radar is concerned, yesterday the radar in California was really just loaded with rain from south to north. You got to remember, folks, this is a time of year we're starting to transition over toward the summer months, and the weather typically gets dry in the southwest and California. So to see it like this in the middle part of May is not something you see very often. And not that it doesn't rain this time of year, but to see it in the magnitude and the depth of the trough is a little bit on the far end of the extremes of weather that you see for this time of year. And of course, you see the rain up in through much of Washington State. We've got flood watches up for that particular area. In California, in the Sierra Nevadas, we've got winter storm warnings posted. I pulled up a couple of random places. I happened to pull up one not too far from Lake Tahoe called Hellhole, California. And its elevation, I believe, was up at around 5,500 feet. And they're forecasting for up to 2 feet of snow there. And remember, by the way, this was an area that got hammered with snow during various points of the winter season, particularly when that trough was strongly established out in the west. Not a whole lot happening as we go east of the Rockies and into the western plains, but I point that out because tomorrow will begin a stretch of days. It's going to be multiple days where we're going to be dealing with severe weather in the plain states, and particularly tomorrow I think could wind up being a very, very robust day indeed with respect to severe weather. We had some thunderstorms roll through Chicago earlier. This band here is dropping southeastward into southern Indiana, and that's inside an area of slight risk, which I'll show you in a moment. And then in the northeast, really just pretty quiet. A couple of very light spot showers in eastern Massachusetts and southeastern New Hampshire. You got a little bit of shower activity coming into Lake Ontario. But as far as the weather is concerned for us, as far as showers are concerned for us, the weather front that's going to bring that in is still a ways away yet, and I don't see any real issues from the standpoint of showers until maybe late tomorrow afternoon into tomorrow night, and then even then it'll be scattered in nature. little bit of shower activity going on down in over the Florida Keys. And we also have a few scattered showers and thunderstorms in parts of Georgia and Alabama this evening. Nothing severe that that SPC is looking at. And of course, the action rather busy in southern Nevada, northwestern Arizona, southwestern Utah, and southeastern California. So again, the West really taking it on the chin here with regards to this storminess. Okay, so let me put this away for a moment. Let me see if I can find the map I'm looking for. All right, we'll start first with this. So we'll go to the U.S. satellite view. And here you have the shot of the storm out in the west on the left. So you can just sort of make out that swirl there. You see the system up in the Great Lakes, far less organized and nowhere near as impressive, obviously, as the system out in the west. But that's the northern part of the jet stream getting a bit busy for us. Last night's little area of showers is passed well offshore, and you've got a trail of clouds from the Caribbean across southern Florida and then extending out to the Atlantic for several hundred miles. It sort of looks like an old frontal boundary sitting down in that area, and not looking for anything to come out of that from the standpoint of the tropics before you ask. It really doesn't look like very much at all, in my opinion. And by the way, we are just 15 days away from the start of hurricane season on the Atlantic side. It has already begun on the Pacific side. So here's our risk area for tonight from SPC. You've got that area of slight risk, kind of a narrow band from Wyoming, cuts across northern Nebraska, northern Iowa, encompasses a good chunk of Illinois and Indiana. Those storms moving through central Indiana right at this moment. It's 7:41 Eastern time, by the way, where we have a working severe thunderstorm watch that is gradually getting clipped away as the area of storms moves southward. But if you're watching this on a replay, as always, you want to check with for the latest weather conditions by going to your local National Weather Service office and looking at the radar and any watches and warnings, and you can access that by going to weather.gov. So that's your severe weather risk for today. So let's go to tomorrow, because tomorrow really is going to be, as I said, a pretty busy day in the land of severe weather. SPC seems to think so. And we have a enhanced risk. This was actually up on the maps yesterday. So as I always say, you start to see the SPC doing this stuff in the long range. You want to pay attention. And we have enhanced risk throughout parts of West Texas and on up into central and eastern Nebraska. That's all inside a large geographic area of slight risk that runs from West Texas on up through the southern and central plains, and even poking its nose into the northern plains. I would consider South Dakota as part of the northern plains, and I guess Nebraska would be more the central. And the marginal risk from there fingers across the lower lakes and then heads up into the northern mid-Atlantic states, northern Virginia, touching southern New Jersey, southern Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Delaware. And that's with the front, of course, that we talked about that's going to be coming through for late tomorrow into tomorrow evening. Now, on the next day, we are going to slightly shift the area to the east. We have enhanced risk in northeastern Texas. We've got slight risk through a good chunk of Texas and Oklahoma, on up through East Kansas and extending northward up into Iowa. Marginal risk through a good portion of the state of Illinois, the rest of the state of Missouri and Arkansas, and then kind of loops around up there into Wisconsin and on up into southern Minnesota, southeastern South Dakota. That's a fairly sizable area of risk here. And this is for the day 3 outlook, which is for Saturday into Sunday. And then when we look at the days 4 and 5 risk and 6 risk areas are being indicated by SPC. Day 4 near the lakes, day 5 down in the southern plains, and day 6 shifting a little bit northeastward from there. So again, these are sort of pay attention moments. As far as the northeast is concerned, doesn't look like we're going to be really much at risk for any severe weather, even though we've got a cold front coming through late tomorrow, and then another one probably later on Monday. There's not the one for tomorrow actually will probably have a little bit more than the one for late Monday, which could very well wind up coming through on the dry side. So let's look at the surface maps and take a look at what's happening, and then I'm going to shift to the upper air, and we'll examine the whole situation with regards to the jet stream flow. And of course, we're starting with tonight. You have waiting for this next frontal boundary to move eastward. One of the things about the way the pattern has kind of shifted a little bit is that at least now it's not going to stop us from getting into situations where there will be issues with the onshore flow, but at least for the time being, weather systems are moving along. So if you have to deal with it, they're frontal with rain showers. You maybe can squeeze out a couple of dry days behind it. I think there's a chance that we could wind up with 3 dry days in a row next week, early next week, if we play our cards right. So it's much better than getting locked into a low that's off the mid-Atlantic coast with a northeast wind and a cold upper trough aloft where you're sitting with temperatures in the low 40s and even the upper 30s, and having to put the heat on and getting some higher elevation snows in upstate New York and New England like we saw Monday and Tuesday. At least we're not going to be dealing with any of that. But out in the west, you can see the light smattering of blue there in parts of in California, in northern Nevada, parts of Utah, Idaho. So this is really this is certainly a reflection of the very cold nature of the upper pattern with how deep the trough is in the west. And as we move into tomorrow night, of course, this front moves through here in the east, and you've got a low in eastern Nebraska firing up that severe weather threat up and down from Texas all the way on northward. And then for Saturday, of course, that severe weather threat shifts slightly eastward. Meanwhile, you are getting slowly into a southwest flow in the east. So I think the warm front, is going to set up north of New York City on up somewhere through upstate New York and into New England. So this is going to allow temperatures to warm up. I don't think we have any rain issues for Saturday, and at least for my specific forecast area, I'm not really even going to put anything in for the daytime Sunday. Maybe Sunday night, because there is going to be a little bit of an upper trough or going through, or perhaps some semblance of a warm front. What happens is the winds are going to shift from south to southwest to west by the time we get to Monday. And this, I think, is going to set us up for a really warm day on Monday with some sun and temperatures that could get well up into the 80s in some places, like in New Jersey and in southern Pennsylvania. Wouldn't even be surprised if we get enough sun where we could see temperatures getting into the well up into the 80s, even up to about New York City. And with a west wind, it also means that coastal areas will warm up into the 80s. In the west now, of course, with the deep trough out in the west, you get a series of lows coming out. Here's one for Sunday, running through Iowa, extending severe weather potential down into Louisiana. And there's another system, by the way. Look at that next arm that comes into California with more heavy rains for later Saturday and Sunday. Low pressure sweeping inland, and then gradually that develops east of the Rockies for early next week. This is next Monday. You've got some pretty fired up weather here by the GFS ahead of that low. So it certainly would imply, again, the idea that there will be multiple days of severe weather threats throughout in the plains is, I think, a pretty real scenario to look ahead to. Next week, of course, after Monday's front goes by, you've got a nice high building in, northerly winds, dry air, Tuesday into Wednesday, and that's pretty decent. If we wind up with very little in the way of showers on Monday, which I think is possible, we could certainly string together 4 dry days, Saturday, Sunday, maybe a little shower activity Sunday night, but it could wind up being dry for a lot of folks for Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday and into Wednesday. And we haven't had a 5-day stretch like that in a while. And in the west, it just continues with the storminess. So let's examine the upper air features here and take a look at what's going on. Let me run back. We'll run back to where we are. This was on Tuesday, Monday into Tuesday, when you had the blockiness to the north in the North Atlantic, deep trough in the east, two strong upper lows, one up in north central Canada, the other one east of Newfoundland, near the southern tip of Greenland. And of course, now that trough in the east pulls out. Look at the jet on the left side in the Pacific. That almost ruler. It's a fire hose across the whole Pacific, running from west to east into California with this deep upper low, which is where we are now. The upper low sitting up in northwestern California and in southwestern Oregon. And behind it, there's your train of upper lows, another one in the Gulf of Alaska, yet another one to the west of that, all in that very, very long jet that comes crashing into the west. And here you have it, deep trough in the west, still having higher than normal pressures across western Canada. You've got an upper high sitting up in western Canada, and yet another one up in the Arctic region. So you got all this higher than normal pressures throughout all of Canada and on up through Greenland, and the jet is suppressed so far to the south. Deep trough out in the west allows for some ridging here in the east, which gives us a break as far as seeing lows trapped, as I said, not dealing with a whole lot with regards to onshore flow. But with all these deep systems coming into the west, it's no wonder that we're seeing this kind of severe weather outbreak that we're looking at for the plains. One short wave coming out for Saturday into Sunday. Here comes the next one in through the southwest that gets kicked up into the Dakotas, and yet another one gets left behind back later next week. So while all this is going on, there's a ridge building in the east that's kind of splitting everything in the middle. It's a typical blocky look to it, but sometimes if you're in a good spot in the block, in a blocky scenario, you could wind up with some pretty decent weather for long stretches of time, and that is what may be at play for the early part of next week at least. You still have a trough sitting near Newfoundland that the GFS picks up on that and tries to kind of drop the heights out in the Atlantic, but it still has ridging in the east, troughing in the west as we head into the Memorial Day holiday weekend, and that trough in the west gets amplified during that weekend, which amplifies the ridge here in the east. It's going to be interesting to see how this all plays when we get toward next weekend. We talked about during the wintertime that sort of unrelenting Pacific jet, and while it has taken a break since mid-April, it seems to have wasted no time coming right back and getting itself involved in the weather along the west coast. It just really does not want to go away. By the way, before everybody asks, we're getting to a time of year where we're going to start to see models spin up tropical systems, and I'm sure those of you who are looking for that sort of thing may have noticed that a few of the runs have done that. I would just strongly advise that we not pay really a whole lot of attention to that because it is, after all, the middle part of May. We've had early season tropical systems, yes, but I'm not going to go gangbusters over models doing it. Here's on this run again, actually wraps up some kind of low that it forms in the Southwest Caribbean and swings it westward. You just can't really use that as any kind of forecast tool or give it any kind of value out 7 to 10 days out and beyond. So just kind of get used to it. You're going to start to see these models spinning these systems up on a relatively regular basis, and there will be times when the potential for tropical development is going to be there, and there's going to be times when the models are going to do it when that potential is not going to be there. So I just want to give you a look at the temperature profile going into this weekend, because you're going to see a gradual expansion of the 80s trying to push up into the northeast. You see it here for Friday afternoon, kind of getting close to New York City. Saturday sort of takes a step back, and you've got 90s being indicated in southeastern Virginia down through North and South Carolina. And now here we go for Sunday, where the 80s on the GFS at least seem to want to push its way up toward New York City. I think it's entirely possible. If we're not going to be dealing with a straight onshore flow and a southwest wind, if we can get some sun, I don't see why it can't make it up to the upper 70s to around 80. And then when we move to Monday, this is where the amount of sun is going to be critical, because if there is a fair amount of sunshine with the west wind, this could be a day where temperatures climb well up into the 80s. And those 80s, by the way, on the GFS push all the way up into New Hampshire and southern Maine. So it's not impossible with a westerly flow ahead of a cold front. And then, of course, you're going to cool off a little bit as you move into Tuesday, because you're going to have a frontal passage back into the 70s. But it's going to get hot down in the southeast, particularly near the coast, with temperatures in the upper 80s and low 90s starting from starting from Tuesday. Not a little patch there in southeast Georgia on Monday, and it gets a little bigger as we move into Tuesday and Wednesday. You've got up mostly lower 90s, nothing too extreme, and it's still there on Thursday. But definitely, if you look at the way the temperatures are working on this map for all of next week, we do see in general, from the mid-Atlantic states southward at least, a transition to really warm to hot weather. And whereas if you go in the northern mid-Atlantic, you're still having to deal with fronts going by, so you're still going to be getting temperature fluctuations going on from time to time. I want to see where I have it hidden, because I know I have it hidden here somewhere. It's just a matter of me finding it. It's here someplace. There we go. I wanted to get WPC's rainfall forecast map for the next 7 days, because it is fairly substantial up through all of the plains, the southern, central, and northern plains into the western lakes. You're talking about a fairly large area of rainfall over the next week of 5 inches or more in some areas, and certainly a very, very large area of 2 inches plus, extending across the Dakotas into Montana, extending eastward into the western lakes. You'll notice the weather in the east, particularly from New York City southward down into Florida, northern half of Florida. Rainfall amounts are very light, not much rain at all. So whatever showers we get probably won't be producing much in the way of rainfall from now through next Thursday. Out in the west, also substantial rains over the next 7 days in central and northern California, and on up through coastal Oregon and Washington. Those narrow but rather impressive areas of 5 inches or more. And by the way, in the Sierra Nevadas, you've got 3, 4, 5 inch liquid amounts being shown there, and a lot of that is going to be in the form of snow. We've got winter storm warnings that are up for that particular region for the Sierra Nevadas in California. Amazing, mid-May, but you're still seeing it. Some places, winter is still trying to hang on. And this is a time of year, by the way, where you do see, the polar vortex is gone in the upper atmosphere. You're seeing really what's left of wintertime cold air getting redistributed around the atmosphere. That's really what the function of the jet stream is at this point. It's taking whatever cold air that's around and just redistributing it out, getting rid of it, and that will gradually make the transition over from spring into the summer season. It is, it's really a testament to the efficiency of the atmosphere on the function of storms to just redistribute heat. Ruthless Goat, thanks for hitting Super Chat tonight. Really appreciate it. Going to use that toward a cigar tonight on my way home. And Jason Schaefer, we did have some nice weather certainly today after the clouds moved out this morning, which was a good thing. Myra Bentley, I believe you're new to the board. Welcome. And Paul Roman, you up in Ulster County, you need to get to some. You guys up, you and Chuck, you both need some decent weather here with what you've had to deal with. Let's see. Ruthless Goat, if you like trains, visit Durango and take their narrow gauge rail to Silverton. Great museum too. I do love trains, and I'm going to do that. I've got a few ideas for train trips, and Scott Briller across the Colorado and the Rockies. That's on my list. I also want to do one up in. I would love to do one of the ones that goes across southern Canada. I'm gonna be doing my research on this. It's on my list of things to do with respect to life going forward. So hopefully I'll have plenty of time. Mirtha Gunter, I have to tell you, I drove, on my drive down, and just how the greenery was just so wonderful to see. Because not that we've of course having that happen here, but just to get out of the clouds and the northeast wind and temperatures in the 40s and 50s, just to get out of that, and then to be driving down through western North Carolina through western Virginia, western North Carolina, it just felt wonderful. And I saw you mention the point, the different shades of green was really impressive, and I saw that all the way down into North Georgia. And Georgia, if you've never been, beautiful. I said this at the beginning, I believe. It's a beautiful state. That whole drive was beautiful. The way back instead of 81, I took 85 to 95, which actually took me a little bit less time than going down 81. But I will have to tell you that when you're crossing North Carolina the long way, I honestly thought I would never get to the state of Virginia. It was just, it just seemed so endless. And to get off of 85, which you do south of Richmond, and I actually got to Washington, D.C. on 95 right at about 6 o'clock Eastern time. Did catch a minimal amount of I did catch some traffic, but it wasn't anything that you couldn't handle. It maybe held me up for about 15-20 minutes, and that was about it. And then it was 95 the rest of the way. Saturday, by the way, is the Preakness, and I'm thinking that it should be a decent day for Saturday at Pimlico in Baltimore. Let me just double check. That front goes through Friday night, and I mean, there are some scattered showers that are indicated by the GFS anyway, around after 5 or 6 o'clock to the west and south of Baltimore. So I guess without just giving it kind of a cursory look, I guess you'll just have to, you might have to throw in the chance for a shower or a scattered shower or a thunderstorm. But that would be as far as I would go. So, I guess a handicap for a fast main track and a firm turf course for the turf races that they'll probably be running earlier in the day. I just want to, without you guys, you can always go to tropicaltidbits.com if you want to look. I'm gonna do this off the screen. Only because of the fact of what I said before, which is this time of year we're gonna start seeing these models spinning up, everything, especially when the Canadian model does it, because that really goes bonkers. I just wanted to see what it did. Okay, so naturally, it's got what looks like a tropical storm to a hurricane in the southwest Caribbean that it turns westward in the northwest Caribbean and just kind of leaves it there. Again, models are going to just be playing that game, so just bear that in mind, all right? So this way you don't get worked up in an excitement. For those of you who are new, the folks that have been here for a long time know all too well that if If I'm not concerned about it, you don't need to be concerned about it. When it starts to look like something's going to happen, I don't keep it a secret. I share it with you, and kind of take you through whatever processes the jet stream is going through, and trying to figure out what exactly is going to happen. We take a very calm, methodical approach to things. There's no need to get worked up over stuff if it happens, and then if it does, you have to go through the formative stages and everything else. So we just kind of take it step at a time. So again, don't get too worked up over what models are doing in the long haul. All right, let's leave it at that. So I don't remember the last time. I have to probably just go back and look, but it's been a long time since I've taken multiple days off from doing live streams. But I kind of needed to do it because you get burned out after a while doing this stuff, and everybody has a life, so you want to try to get a little downtime, of course, and it kind of piles on. So it was nice having the days off. Now I'm getting back in sync, and I'm going to try to keep it going through the weekend. I do have a wedding on Saturday that I'm attending, so I'm going to have to see about how I'm going to get a live stream done with respect to the wedding during the day. But I will get one up over the weekend. Of course, we have tomorrow, and next week it's just going to be normal stuff every day as we move through. And guess what? Next weekend is the Memorial Day holiday weekend, folks. It's already here, which is amazing. Okay, it just seemed like we just turned over to 2019, and here we are, almost we're 5/12 of the way through it, and the unofficial start, quote unquote, of the summer season. It's just about here. Okay, so good to see you, Bob Brown. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it. And Box 505, William Huber, Alfred Phillips, always our buddy from up in Wainwright, Alaska, Anthony Orr, handicapping races as he does oh so well. So we'll be back tomorrow. As I mentioned earlier, I'm having trouble doing live streams on Facebook, so the Joe and Joe Weather Show will be on Joe Rayo's Facebook page, which is Joe Rayo Weather. And if you're on Facebook, you can either watch it there. I'll share it back to my page too, so you can, if you can't watch it live, you can watch it on a replay on either page. All right, so we'll leave it at that. Have a great rest of your night. Ruthless Goat, thanks for hitting Super Chat. As I said, that's going to get me, we'll put it toward a cigar on the way home, and we'll see you probably at the same time tomorrow, 7:30 Eastern Time. Good night, everybody.